All right, so we are going to continue covering steps to the American Revolution, the Intolerable Acts, part 2 and 3. I'm going to record both parts of the video at once, so this will be a longer one. Our learning objective remains the same. I will be able to summarize the effects of the acts leading up to the revolution and their importance. Our data goal is about 70%. So historically, this is not a standard that scholars tend to be super successful on, but my goal for you all is 70%. So we start with the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre was a deadly riot that occurred on March 5th, 1770 on King Street in Boston. So the Boston Massacre began as a street brawl between the American colonists and a single British soldier, but it quickly escalated. If you look at this image, you can make an inference. The people in red, those are the British soldiers. The ones on the left that are kind of in blue and white, those are the American colonists. You can probably infer that this painting was done by an American colonist just because of how it depicts or shows the event. As I said, this was a conflict between British soldiers and American colonists. Even today, in this day and age, there is a memorial in Boston showing the Boston Massacre and showing, commemorating the event and the people whose lives were lost. So as I told you, it began as a street brawl between American colonists and a single British soldier, but quickly escalated to a chaotic, bloody slaughter. So the Boston Massacre actually began when a colonist thought it would be funny just to throw a rock at a British soldier. British soldiers reacted using violence and using guns, and that is why 5 people lost their life. So here's our first question of the day. What happened just before what we see in this picture that led to the bloodshed? If you're watching this video after class, go ahead and just verbally respond. What happened right before this image that led to the bloodshed? Awesome. If you said somebody threw a rock, it was a simple fight, conflict between British soldiers and American colonists, all of those responses are technically correct. My next question is, where does the Boston Massacre fall on our timeline? A, B, C, or D? Go ahead and select where you think the Boston Massacre falls on this timeline. Great, so the Boston Massacre is letter B. It occurred in March of 1770. 5 people were killed. Key point 2. Many people died in the massacre, but the first to die was a freed Black man named Crispus Attucks. So as I told you all, this was a very bloody and chaotic event, and 5 people lost their lives. The reason we talk about Crispus Attucks is because he was the first victim. So this is Crispus Attucks. He was a free Black man living in Boston in the late 1700s, and he was the first person killed by British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. Crispus Attucks is considered the first person to die for the cause in the American Revolution. So Crispus Attucks is considered the first person to die. And when I say the revolution, yes, I mean like the Revolutionary War. More specifically, I'm talking about the ongoing struggle between the colonists and Great Britain for the colonists to be free from Great Britain. So he is considered the first person to die for the cause in the American Revolution. Here is your question. Who is this and why is he significant to the Boston Massacre? Okay, the answer should be, this is Crispus Attucks, and he is significant to the Boston Massacre because he is considered, or he was the first person to die, and he is considered the first person to die for the cause in the American Revolution. Okay, now you're going to select which words describe the Boston Massacre. So if you had to pick some words off this list, which words would you use to describe the overall Boston Massacre? Go ahead and select your words now. So the words I would select are violent, chaotic, gruesome, tragic, bloody, and historic. So this conflict, the Boston Massacre, increased anti-British sentiment and resentment among the colonists. So this conflict basically, so anti-British sentiment means disliking the British, having bad feelings about the British. This conflict increased how much the colonists hated Great Britain. So after the Boston Massacre, the colonists are really upset with Great Britain. And they blame the whole Boston Massacre on the British soldiers. So this painting, again, that we've already looked at, we can probably guess a colonist painted this picture because it depicts the British being unnecessarily violent towards the colonists. So at this point in time, how do the colonists feel about Great Britain? Go ahead and pick an emoji that represents how the colonists feel about Great Britain. The emoji I would have selected was the angry one. If not the angry one, I would accept the sad one as well. After the Boston Massacre, colonists became less or more distrustful of the British. Go ahead and pick the term that best fits this sentence. I would suggest you double check on this one because this wording can be a little tricky. So after the Boston Massacre, colonists became more or less distrustful of the British. So the correct answer, after the Boston Massacre, colonists became more distrustful of the British. To break it down for you, distrustful means they do not trust them. So after the Boston Massacre, because colonists saw the British as being at fault, they thought the massacre was the British's fault, they trusted the British less after this violent conflict. Key point 4. The Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred on December 16th, 1773 at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts. We're going to watch a super short video that talks to us about the Boston Tea Party.
1773. The Boston Tea Party was a protest against British taxation. In 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act. This meant that the British East India Company had a monopoly on the American tea trade. The colonials were angry. There were public protests throughout the colonies over this interference in American business. Cries of "no taxation without representation" were made. This meant that colonial Americans wanted to be taxed by American representatives, not the British Parliament. On December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, planned to show the Parliament how they felt about the Tea Act. They boarded the British ships docked in Boston Harbor, dressed up as Indians, and dumped nearly $1 million worth, in today's money, of tea in the water. This event came to be known as the Boston Tea Party. The British Parliament passed the coercive acts as punishment, but this only strengthened the resistance to the British Crown and pushed the two sides closer to war. Subscribe to our channel for more videos.
All right, so the Boston Tea Party, a couple things I want to highlight. One, the colonists threw about $1 million worth of tea into the ocean. So the colonists wasted a lot of the British's money in the Boston Tea Party. The name Boston Tea Party may make us think it's more like funny or silly than it was, but in reality, they did waste a lot of money and a lot of tea in the Boston Tea Party. Okay, next question. Why did colonists throw tea into the ocean in Boston? They wanted to perform a violent act against Great Britain. They wanted to show England that they were upset with the tea tax, so they disposed of England's tea. They wanted to prove to Great Britain that they could physically overpower them in battle. Go ahead and select your response. Why did the colonists throw tea in the ocean in Great Britain? Why did colonists throw tea in the ocean in Boston? Your correct answer is the blue box. So the colonists threw tea because they wanted to show England that they were upset with the tea tax. So this whole event is in response to the tea tax. Because colonists were so upset with the tax on tea, they threw away the tea as a way of saying, nice try, Great Britain, we're not paying it. Next question. Where does the Boston Tea Party fall on our timeline? A, B, C, or D? Where is the Boston Tea Party? Okay, so the correct answer for this one was letter choice C, like cat. So the Boston Tea Party took place in 1773. I want to note that the Boston Tea Party was after the Boston Massacre. So first Boston Massacre, and then 3 years later, Boston Tea Party. Key point 5. This event was the first major act of defiance to British rule from the colonists. It showed Great Britain the colonists would stand up against taxation and tyranny. So let's break this down. So defiance is doing the opposite of what you're supposed to do on purpose. So this was the first major act of defiance. So this was the first time the colonists really stood up against Great Britain. Great Britain is pretty surprised. They are shocked that the colonies would do something so wild. So a good way to think of the colonies in Great Britain at this point in history is like a mother-teenager relationship, where Great Britain is the parent and the colonies are the teenagers. So the colonies decide to waste $1 million worth of tea. They have this big event. It's a whole big deal, whole fiasco. Great Britain is really shocked. They have never seen the colonies act like this. So they're a little surprised and taken off guard. This was also the first time the colonies stood up against Great Britain. Previously, there had been like boycotts or maybe publications, but this was the first major event where the colonies stood up against Great Britain. First question, what is significant about the Boston Tea Party? It was the first time the colonists rebelled against Great Britain. It was the biggest financial loss for Great Britain. It was the first time the colonists realized they were unhappy with Great Britain. Go ahead and select your response. Okay, so the correct answer, it was the first time the colonists rebelled against Great Britain. All right, next question asks you to be a little creative. What was Great Britain thinking after the Boston Tea Party? So I want you to put yourself in Great Britain's shoes. What were they thinking? What was going on in their brains after the Boston Tea Party? So here's my version. Yours should be a little bit different. The colonists could not be trusted and needed to be punished. Okay, key point 6. Following the Boston Tea Party, Great Britain passed the Intolerable Acts to punish colonists. So the Intolerable Acts cover a lot. Most notably, they closed the port of Boston. So because of the Boston Tea Party, Great Britain said to the colonies, y'all can't be trusted. You are no longer allowed to use the port of Boston. They also passed the Massachusetts Government Act, which did not allow colonists to meet in groups. So it also took away the colony's charter. And it's fourth on our list, but the third one I'm going to talk about is the Quartering Act, which we talked about before. That forced the colonists to act as free Airbnbs for British soldiers. The result of the Intolerable Acts, colonists are getting more frustrated. They're getting more annoyed with Great Britain's strict rules. And as the colonists are getting more annoyed, Great Britain is getting more powerful. So there's a strong imbalance of power. The colonies Great Britain is putting more laws on the colonies to keep them quiet and keep them behaved. Colonies are starting to like boil up in frustration. They don't want to be restricted anymore. They want to run themselves. Know that tensions are rising between Great Britain and the colonies in this point in history. First question, what was the consequence of the Boston Tea Party? So think of it this way. Think of it as cause and effect. The cause was the Boston Tea Party. What was the effect? What did the British do to react to the Boston Tea Party? The correct answer for this one is pass the Intolerable Acts. So the Intolerable Acts were a consequence to the Boston Tea Party. Last question of the day. The Intolerable Acts were passed as a result of blank to punish the colonists. Boston Massacre, French and Indian War, Boston Tea Party. Which one of these were passed to punish colonists after, what happened that caused the British to pass the Intolerable Acts? All right, the correct answer for this one is the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Tea Party caused the British to release the Intolerable Acts. We're going to move on to part 3. So as I told you all, this was going to be one long video. So we are now finishing up our discussion on the Intolerable Acts. Before we dig deep, I want to do a quick recall. Why did the British tax the colonists? The first reason the British taxed the colonists was to recover money they spent in the French and Indian War. So the British spent a lot of time and money and resources defending the colonies in the French and Indian War. So when that war ended, they needed a reason, they needed money, so they taxed the colonists to make that money. Eventually, the British passed the Intolerable Acts to punish the colonists after the Boston Tea Party. So that is why the British are taxing the colonists. So the British colony, key point 1. The British colonies use a system called mercantilism. Mercantilism is a system where a nation increases their wealth by getting raw materials from its colonies. In this system, the colony exists to benefit the mother country. We have talked a lot about mercantilism before. This graphic should be familiar to you. In this case, the mother colony is England. The colonies are the 13 colonies. So the colonies and the mother country are exchanging goods. They are trading goods between them. Please remember that under mercantilism, colonies cannot trade with themselves. So under mercantilism, colonies can only trade with the mother country. And let's remind ourselves that under mercantilism, the colonies have one job. They have one job. And their one job is to make money for the mother country. So if we look at this image here, this is a political cartoon that is showing colonies quite literally serving the mother country with raw materials. These raw materials are processed in the mother country and then sold again, which ultimately makes the mother country a profit. So examples include gold and silver, food, raw materials such as tobacco and cotton. So the colony's only job is to create wealth for the mother country. Okay, here's our first question of the day. Under mercantilism, the colony's only job is to blank. What is the colony's only job under mercantilism? Go ahead and pause the video now and select your response. Great, so under mercantilism, the colony's only job is to make money for the mother country by producing raw materials. So who would enjoy the effects of mercantilism and who would not? Go ahead and draw a line depicting who would enjoy and who would not enjoy mercantilism. So the group that would enjoy mercantilism is England. Okay, so England would enjoy the effects of mercantilism. This line is a little hard to see, but it's there. England would enjoy the effects of mercantilism because they are more or less being fed free raw materials and not having to really do much to get those raw materials. The colonies would not enjoy mercantilism. They are doing all the heavy lifting, quite literally, and they are still not really making a profit. So the colonies do not enjoy mercantilism. Mercantilism also limits who the colonies can trade with. Moving forward. Key point 1B, no taxation without representation. Great Britain was making the colonists pay taxes, but in return, the colonists did not get a voice in the British government, which we call Parliament. No taxation without representation. This is a phrase you will become very familiar with as we move forward in this unit. Here's an example of no taxation without representation for you. Let's pretend that everybody in my classroom or on my YouTube channel or in my Zoom classroom, everybody is going to pay $10 to see a movie. Everyone is going to pay $10 to see a movie. What movie do you all want to see? Think of a movie you would want to see if you had to pay $10 to your teacher to see a movie. Great, I hope you thought of a good movie. Now here's the catch. You just paid your $10, great, but I get to pick the movie. So taxation without representation is the colonists paying money to the government and not getting a say in the government. So the colonists are paying a lot of their money in taxes. A lot of the money they make goes to taxes. Those taxes automatically make money for England. But although the colonists are paying taxes to Great Britain, they're not getting any say in British government. So they're paying all this money in taxes, but they don't get a choice in who represents them. They don't get a choice in other laws. They don't get a say in any major decisions that are happening in Parliament. Go ahead and select on this mood meter. How are the colonists feeling at this point? So pick a word that describes how the colonists are feeling at this point. If I were you, I would have selected something in the red. I know tensions between Great Britain and the colonists are really rising right now. They're increasing. Great Britain is annoyed with the colonists. The colonists are annoyed with Great Britain. They are bickering, they are fighting, they cannot get along. Okay, next question for you. Oops. What were colonists referring to with this slogan? No taxation without representation. What were colonists referring to? Your response should be something like the colonists were referring to paying taxes to Great Britain without having a voice in British government. Key point 2. In mercantilism, the expectation is that the colonies are buying the produced goods from the mother countries. The 13 colonies realized that they were getting ripped off by this system. So under mercantilism, colonies really are only trading with each other. Colonies are only trading with their mother country. So colonies cannot trade with South America or countries in Africa or other European nations. They are forced to trade with only the mother country. In fact, the colonies were forbidden from trading with foreign nations. So at this point, a lot of scholars like to say, well, why didn't the colonists just trade with the French? They couldn't, because in the system of mercantilism, colonies can only trade with their mother country, which in this case is England. Key point 2. Because of mercantilism, the colonies were forced to buy goods from England. So as we talked about with that map, because of this system of mercantilism, the colonies were forced to buy goods from England. So what do the colonies do? Is they boycott. So the colonists stopped buying British goods in a boycott. We know a boycott is when you refuse to support a business or a group by not buying their products. So for example, if you do not agree with Walmart, you might boycott purchasing goods from Walmart. What policy limited the colonies' access to foreign trade? Charters, foreign policy, or mercantilism? Which one of these 3 topics limited the colonies' access to foreign trade? In other words, which of these 3 told colonists that they could not trade with others other than the mother country? Excellent. You should have selected mercantilism. Which 2 variables forced the colonies to continue to trade exclusively with England? Under mercantilism, the colonies could only trade with their mother country, England. Under mercantilism, England limited the colonies' access to boats, forcing them to stay on the mainland. Under mercantilism, other European nations wanted to colonize the New World, so England did not allow them to dock on colonial shores. Under mercantilism, the colonies existed purely to benefit England, the mother country. Under mercantilism, the colonies in England had a mutually beneficial system that neither party wanted to disrupt. So which of these 2 explained why colonies only traded with England? Go ahead and select your response. All right, key point 3. The boycott severely hurt the British economy, which increased Great Britain's frustration with the colonies. So because the colonists are boycotting England, King George III, who is the King of Great Britain, gets impatient. And Parliament, the English lawmaking group, begins brainstorming new ways to restrict the colonies. So now King George III and the colonies are basically just trying to ruin each other's days, right? They are both trying to seek revenge on each other. So Parliament's solution, the English government solution, was to send soldiers to the colonies and to pass more acts to restrict the colonists. They wanted to restrict the colonists. All over the place. Okay, how is England feeling about the behavior coming from the colonies? Go ahead and select that on your screen. How does England feel about the colonies' behavior? You're going to pick one of the moods on the mood meter. Okay, if I were you, I probably would have picked surprised, shocked, enraged, furious, or livid. I would have picked one of these. Okay, last question of the day. Parliament in England sought to blank the colonists by creating more acts and taxes. Did they seek to encourage, punish, understand, or expand? What did Parliament want to do to the colonists? The correct answer for this one is letter 2, punish. Parliament's whole goal was to punish the colonists by creating more acts. That concludes our Intolerable Acts Part 3. This walks us right up to almost the start of the Revolutionary War. Before I end this video, I want to make sure we revisit our learning objective. I will be able to summarize the effects of the acts leading up to the revolution and their importance. That was your goal in watching this video today.